Morning Live. So yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa concluded his two-day working visit to the UK, where he did the opening for the 6th Financial Times Africa Summit. The president addressed leaders from the continent as well as the media. In a conversation with the editor of the Financial Mail, Lionel Barber, Ramaphosa discussed the fact that the cost of state capture was bigger than thought and may have cost the country between 500 billion and R1 trillion. Some have suggested that the actual cost, as we say, in the region of R1 trillion. Even the cost of the investigation into the state capture, namely the Zondo Commission, will cost over 350 million rand. Joining us now to discuss this further, political analyst Ongama Mtimka from our Port Elizabeth studios and legal political commentator Justin Ramages here in our Auckland Park studio. Good to have you, Justin. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And I know we were having some problems with the sound with Ongama. I hope we're okay. We'll check in with him as soon as we get that sorted out. But Ongama will be joining us in the conversation. So what did you make yesterday? I mean, I just saw all of a sudden everybody talking to 500 billion to R1 trillion in state capture. Did it come as a surprise to you?
Not really. I think it was an interesting preface by Lionel Barber. I think there was a bit of a bait where he said, look, I'm a numbers guy, and on my numbers, it's 500 billion. President Ramaphosa comes back and says it's probably that, but some have suggested that it's around R1 trillion, which is concerning because that represents 20% of our GDP. So what I make of it is we're in a position where we have this 10-year lag. The people have participated factually in performance of our state, and there's money that has been extracted or money that has been lost because of ill performance. So it's good that we're putting it out there, transparency, because we as a private citizen who contributes to this representative government can now start to look at the team that we've put in place and hold them accountable, because their performance impacts on us as private citizens.
Yeah, certainly. Ongama, I'm just going to check if you can hear us now, and if all is okay with our sound in Port Elizabeth. Good, looks like you can. Ongama, the question that I posed to Justin was very much so, were you shocked when you heard the amount, or should I say, were you shocked to hear the president being as transparent as he was yesterday when it came to the magnitude of corruption in the country?
Not shocked at all, Leanne. In fact, I think that whatever the model has been used to arrive at the estimated cost is most likely, tracing costs which can be, which are directly related to the state capture transactions. There are indirect costs. So for me, I think that if you factor in some of the qualitative aspects of state capture, you could easily have that figure go even above R1 trillion, actually. It's a huge amount of money. And if you think about it, our budgets in South Africa, I think between 2009 up till now, range between about R1 trillion to 1.8 trillion. Yeah. So that's our annual budget. So that's the extent to which this figure, is impactful in the country's macroeconomy.
Yeah. And the reality is, as we mentioned, is it's still growing. We look at the State Capture Commission sitting at 350 million. That's just the Commission of Inquiry. There's still going to be much more after this. I mean, we're hoping there's going to be much more after that. Legal trials, things are going to happen. State capture is just growing. These bills are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we're not going to stop here. This is going to continue, Justin.
Sure, and it has to do so. As I think what we need to move away is the framing of it as in a capitalistic state, but rather draw it back to the private citizen. We are held accountable for paying our bills, for paying for food, for assuring our housing, and if anything goes wrong in our payment structure, we are held to account. Now, those monies that we contribute to taxes, at a tax level, we have ill performance, mismanagement, misallocation of capital, corruption. And when those team players are not performing in a way that is representative or to the benefit of the private citizen, it becomes a problem. So we can't have a government who's saying, listen, we won't change. You have to stay the same, but we won't change. We'll continue to misspend and make decisions that will affect you, because whatever gains we make as private citizens are really set off against the poor performance of a government. And I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying those specific parties who have intentionally participated either in corruption, wasteful expenditure, or the misallocation of resources.
Yeah. So let's talk to the realities of the situation here. And Ongama, I'm going to throw it to you. You know, the president obviously has spoken of these 9-10 wasted years, of which he was a part of it as well. He became the deputy president of the country in 2014. Why did he never say anything at the time?
There are two explanations that are brought forward there, Leanne. One is that the president needed to kind of lie low so that he was not weakened by being removed as the deputy president, and therefore positioned in a way that odds created against him in order to rise to the presidential office. The other view is that, for me, and I hold this particular view, that the president ought to have spoken at the time that it mattered most.
Yeah.
To come at this time, post facto, when you were the deputy president, and in fact you were indifferent throughout the time that these billions of rands were being swindled out of the fiscus, and didn't use the political machinery of the party. In fact, used that political machinery to defend what was taking place. Because we must not now individualize our problem as a Jacob Zuma problem. We had an ANC problem because the ANC refused to take action against the president, and in fact didn't even protect its own members when the president sacked them, and they raised concern about, you know, what was going on. So this generation of ANC leaders who are there, in fact, since Polokwane, have got to take accountability, including the likes of Minister Pravin Gordhan, because almost single-handedly, all of them, in two occasions, they had the choice to support a candidate other than President Jacob Zuma, who could not be argued to have suddenly changed when he was president. All the signs were there that this was his approach, and in fact, the argument goes that even going to the liberation struggle years, President Zuma had a propensity towards self-interest. So if he's somebody who would have been known to have such a predisposition, then it was highly reckless and irresponsible to campaign for him to take charge of the senior offices in the country. So all of them must take responsibility as far as I'm concerned. Also, President Ramaphosa, going to the Mangaung conference, chose, whether or not it was a good strategy and foresight in terms of prospects of becoming president, he chose to be on the slate of President Zuma as opposed to that of President Kgalema Motlanthe, who was evidently seeing that the direction that President Zuma was taking the country and the ANC was not the preferred or in the best interests of the country. So none of them, in my view, can come now and actually act surprised and shocked. They must take full responsibility for even that 9 wasted years.
Yeah. I mean, Justin, I'm going to put this to you, but I'm going to add a different spin to it. Very much so what Ongama is saying. The president said now that they're making sure that anyone who was complicit to all of this going to be held accountable. However, having said that, and very much so what Ongama was saying, I mean, let's just take one example where Fikile Mbalula was told in an NEC meeting back in 2011 that he was informed by the Guptas that he was going to be appointed the sports minister. This was told in an open NEC meeting. Our president was sitting right there. He heard this. This was told at the commission by Siphiwe Nyanda. So how do you claim innocence when you've heard this? You knew this was happening?
Sure. So I'd like to answer that question, and then I'd like to
Please
filter
do,
in
please do.
to my colleague's question. So the difficulty with politics, and I'd like to add on what
Ongama was saying, yeah,
which is different from law, is you're not looking your enemy in the eye, firstly. Secondly, we can't ignore the inherent tensions that are existing in the ANC. So not every time is the right time. And when you're taking on someone that is more powerful than you, that has more abilities than you, that controls the state machinery, you're not there. So while he comes in 2014, he's always been an ANC member. He's always been, part of the ANC. He's responsible for our negotiations. So we have 2014 to 2018, learning what's going on, participating in it, and when the time is right, because not every time is the right time, he decides to take a play for it, and here we have it. But he's still in a vulnerable position, so we can't ignore that. What we would have liked to see, all of us, is that he had spoke out more clearly and definitively at material times. That's what we would have wanted. So I want to park that. Okay, so to get back to your next question, which is the legal question. What we would have liked to see is more definitiveness, because I think the South African public, and especially me, we're tired of talking and no change from state entities, right? There's always this thing, there's a new dawn, there's a change, but there's this continual system of misbehavior. So we have a person who's trying to do it. We have people who are opposed to it, but we want to take definitive actions. And I think he's in a very precarious position as a politician. Participating wants to make sure that we have this change, but in bringing the change, incrementally that is, you are still at risk, and we can't ignore that.
No, we certainly can't.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, that some of the people fingered in what the president has said, we are going to take action against them, are still actively in government. They are still role players in the government today and making major decisions on our behalf. I mean, do you not think that we need to see prosecutions, or is that too early at this stage? Do we need to see the whole process through?
Sure. So I guess what we're doing, we're on a fact-finding mission. And just because something's ventilated in the public domain and there's allegations, we need trial-ready facts where we can prosecute. So we've had many instances where people have conveyed messages at the state capture trial, and as soon as you hear that is wrong, and when you hear the opposing view, you say, listen, we need to get some clarity who was doing what. So while I agree with you principally, those people who are complicit or directly involved in state capture should be removed and prosecuted. Agreed. Whether we have the facts and evidence to do so, if we don't, we need to collect them. So all of that I agree with. All I'm just putting is the nuances, that the space that you operate in. It's not always that clear cut.
No, and the law has to come into play, which is where you come from as well. Ongama, when we look at former President Jacob Zuma, we need to say that, he, of course, is the one that set up the commission, which is quite a contradiction, because he is the one that's never really admitted ever that state capture actually happened.
Yeah, we do live in a post-truth world. We do live in a world where facts are subject to various interpretations by people, or events are subject to various interpretations. This is why I think that the ANC has plunged the country into a crisis by focusing on. So in fact, there's a dual role in which the ANC interacts with legal processes. There's one which is comfortable to itself, that says, don't act against particular people until they have been proven by a court of law to have been on the wrong side of the law. That discussion is devoid of values and morality. And while post-truth thinking suggests that values and morality are subject to interpretation and contestation, fact is that what has been driving the voter preference in South Africa, particularly since 2016, has been more moralistic issues. So that the ANC allows those who are accused of corruption to still play prominent roles in their leadership, notwithstanding the aspirational values of its own guiding documents on leadership renewal, and generally what kind of caliber of leadership and cadreship is required in the ANC. So for me, I wouldn't necessarily buy into the idea that those who hold public office can continue to do so even against a cloud of corruption allegations, precisely because courts had not yet proved them to have in fact done the wrongs which are alleged. We are there now because the ANC has veered off the moral values that had guided the party from its founding. It was unthinkable, unfathomable in its history to even think that there would be a time when people who are accused of grand scale corruption would be at the helm of the party today.
So there's so much to talk about, but I want to quickly go into another issue, if we can sort of answer quite quick on these ones. What the president did say is that he strengthened organizations and made them more independent, those that were previously very well compromised. That's the word we're looking for. SARS and the NPA. Are you happy with the state of them now, Justin?
I think they have to grow into that independence role. While they've been given that, they need the opportunity to get the big wins, recalibrate and be able to refresh themselves and collect, because we have the Tom Mayani problem, so they got to collect sufficient taxes to make sure that our tax base is not eroded. We have the NPA that they got to prosecute. I think the first hurdle is the Jacob Zuma trial, that they got to get through. I think then once we get through that, then we can look at all of these other trials that need to go on. But I think they need to grow into it, and the opportunities, unfortunately from a legal perspective, as soon as the courts are activated, like my brother says, only then can you get a particular decision. So we've got to wait for those processes to run, and time will tell.
One of the other things is that he spoke to obviously corruption being bigger than what we even imagine. Ongama, I'm coming to you. And also saying that don't rule out some of the blue chip companies that have been involved. They, with a great reputation, were involved in sophisticated siphoning. All of this being said, with a lot of business people from South Africa sitting in the audience, and I've seen a lot of reports focusing on the fact that Johan Rupert happened to be sitting in the audience at the time that this was spoken to. Talk to us about that. The blue chip companies that are involved. You see America coming in, putting sanctions against the Gupta family. I don't know that we have sanctions against them here in South Africa. I mean, what does that say about us?
Sure. So first of all, with respect to the role of conglomerates and multinational companies who have blue chip status, throughout history they've played that role, especially in the developing world. In fact, John Perkins calls them economic hitmen who collude with politicians. And in fact, the things that they do, especially around infrastructure provision and mega projects, they collude with local politicians, sell unaffordable economic or infrastructure projects, and then swindle billions out of the country. And generally, that's sometimes in aid of the country in which they come from, or at times they act independently. So that's something that is known in the global political economy, that it happens everywhere, especially with respect to, for example, arms deals transactions and mega infrastructure projects. With respect to the sanctions against the Guptas, I suppose, you see, our legal system evolved out of a culture in which people's rights were violated, and grossly so, including in how law was practiced. And I think that we kind of overcompensated with that. There can be an argument along those lines. That's one. But secondly, we've seen the NPA bungling cases. So for me, it would not make sense to actually sanction the Guptas when you had cases before courts which were soon thrown out, and there were reversals against assets which were freezed and all of those things. To me, the suggestion is we should get our story together. We should, I agree with what Justin was saying, that we must get we must allow the cases to arrive at a threshold where they are ready for court cases in order to take decisions like those. But what I was saying with respect to politicians is that you don't have to wait for those. As a politician, in fact, as a political party, you have to protect yourself by guarding your values. And at the slightest impression of those values being violated, you have a right to act. You don't have to wait for courts for that.
Guys, what an awesome discussion. Thank you so much for being with us here in studio. We're running into 8 o'clock here on the program, so I need to wrap it. Ongama Mtimka and Justin Ramages talking to us about the president's visit in the UK in an interview where he said that state capture has cost South Africa between £500 million and 1 trillion rand. Let's get the latest news.